Right. Here's a small question. It's really intriguing that these events were occurring in Africa at the same time the American civil rights struggle and the struggle for racial justice. Is it just an accident, or do you think there's some important connection between what was happening in Africa and what was happening in the United States?
Well, there is an important connection in that the African independence movement actually inspired a lot of the civil rights movement at the time, and Martin Luther King said that they were inspired when they saw African nations becoming independent. They were inspired to work and struggle for freedom of black people in America. But then it goes back and forth across the Atlantic, where the Africans see black people fighting for their independence and for their freedom in America, and they become inspired to demonstrate nonviolently in countries like South Africa and other places to fight against colonialism. So both movements influence each other.
That really is interesting. That's an important thing. Let's go back to the American side of things. I know that you are well informed, or at least better informed than I am, about the drum movement here in Detroit. I think it was Detroit-centered. Could you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, drum was the Dodge Revolutionary Union movement, and that's what drum stood for, but it was part of an overall organization called the League of Revolutionary Black Workers. And the League of Revolutionary Black Workers was an organization that believed that the United Auto Workers had become too close to the bosses, too close to the auto companies, and were not representing the interests of the black workers. Black workers were in the plants, but they had second-class jobs. Black workers were not the foreman. They, quite often there might be a token black person, but still there was discrimination in the plants, in hiring and in firing and in promotion. So this was a Marxist organization that believed somewhat that workers, as a organizing power base, could achieve some social change in America. They were somewhat we might call the New Left, in that there was, of course, the old Communist Party, but their philosophy of workerism was not so much accepted by black militants during those years, because there was a perception that white workers were racist. That it was interesting that Marcus Garvey had opposed the socialist movement, because he said, if the proletariat comes to power in America, you would be placing in power the most anti-black, the most uneducated segment of white America. And that was similar to the philosophy that develops in Drum and the League of Revolutionary Black Workers. That the very workers that were promoting racism in Detroit and were had the most anathema toward black people were the ones that the old Communist Party saying they were going to make a revolution, but they quite often were the most reactionary. That was the perception.
That's interesting.
So Drum and L-Rum, which was another one that dealt with labor, and they had one of these union movements was in Chrysler, General Motors, and Ford, and I think American Motors at the time.
And were there some successes?
Well, there were strikes and there were militant actions in the plants, but at the time I wasn't involved with that movement because I didn't quite believe that a workers' movement was going to do it. So I would have debates on the street with them, and I knew them, and we would discuss the best means for black people to liberate themselves. And when you're 18 and 19, you have all these ideals, and they were young, they had great ideas, we had great ideas, and our ideas kind of clashed.
What was your organization?
Oh, I was in the Black Panther Party at the time. So we had a different philosophy but we shared with them a common critique of capitalism and racism as being the kind of a two-headed monster in America that was responsible for the problems that we were having, as well as for the war in Vietnam and other things that we were against.
You mentioned to me that some of the founders of Drum are still here in Detroit.
Yeah. You have, yes, General Baker and his wife, Marion Kramer, and you have a number of other people who are still around. But we also had, there were allies who were not black. You had a judge who, I think he passed away recently, named Justin Rabbits, who was an ally. And you also had a great lawyer and great advocate for the people named Kenny Cockrell, who was a lawyer who was involved in this Revolutionary Union movement and supported it and represented its members. His son now is, of course, on the city council,
Right.
the city of Detroit.
Right. We're kind of approaching the end of this, this conversation, but there's one other topic I wanted to talk to you about, and that is the recent experience you had in traveling to France and working with some of the immigrant organizations which are just beginning maybe the kind of struggle that the United States witnessed in the 1960s.
Yes, I was invited to go to France. What had happened is Kathleen Cleaver, who had lived in France after she left Algeria, had been invited to come, but she had already committed to go to Brazil. So she contacted me and asked me would I go in her place. So I went, and it was activists who were doctoral students and professors and just regular working people and activists and media people. And I was in Saint-Denis, right outside of Paris, and we had a series of forums about the issues in France, particularly the rights of immigrants, issues of racism, and what I found, they looked toward Black America's experience as being some kind of example to emulate, because there was a perception that I saw that they had no history of this kind of activism in America. So I was struck that they were walking around with Angela Davis's books in French, and the autobiography of Malcolm X in French, and Mumia Abu-Jamal's book in French. Matter of fact, they had a street in Saint-Denis named Rue du Mumia Abu-Jamal, named after Mumia Abu-Jamal, who was a member of the Black Panther Party. So they were avidly listening to me for, for some kind of wisdom that they could use from my experiences. The issue of police brutality was one of the main ones, and they seemed to have been really at the stage where we were in 1969, 68. And I remember talking to them about the issue of a civilian review board of the police, and that the police, as takes place in France, should not be the ones who review police behavior only, which is what takes place in France, and that there should be civilian review of the police, and that wherever that was advocated in America, just advocating that the civilians have a right to review the behavior of the police, just that advocating of that could modify police behavior, just advocating it. And you would have thought that I had come down from Mount Sinai with some revelation. I was just struck. It's like, you guys never thought of this? No, they hadn't. And there were no civilian review boards. And I told them that, these are things that you must press your city council for, or people who want your vote. If you want our vote, then you must support a civilian review board of the police.